It really was the farmers markets that opened all of the doors and opportunities for us. It's hard work. It's every Saturday, it's every week of the year, but it's a really effective method of advertising, of marketing. And believe it or not, folks that own these restaurants or these apothecary stores, they go to the farmers markets to find the local producers. And so me being at the farmers market, selling direct to consumer every weekend was also a way to showcase to the restaurants, to the chefs that were coming, to the apothecary store owners that came. They see that, okay, they have consistent supply. They're here every week. Their product looks good every week. I'm going to go talk to those folks.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gabriella Soto-Velez, and I'm a Sustainable Agriculture Specialist here at NCAT. And I'm really excited because I'm getting to talk with my colleague today, Cody Brown, who is also a Sustainable Ag Specialist. But on top of that, he's been producing mushrooms for a while now. So we get the opportunity to pick his brain, see what he's producing, how he managed to scale up, issues that he's faced along the way. So thank you for joining us, Cody.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Gabriella. Howdy, folks. Howdy, listeners. My name's Cody Brown. I'm a Sustainable Ag Specialist for NCAT, and I started producing mushrooms in November of 2020. And hopefully I can offer some insight and experience, good and bad.
Awesome. So sounds like it was probably a pandemic hobby. And I've dabbled a little bit in mushrooms, but I definitely haven't gotten to the scale that you're at now. So I would love to hear how you got started, because you often hear the anecdote of people starting in their closets. So what did your journey look like?
Yeah, I didn't start in my closet. You know, my first insight into mushroom production was in graduate school. I took a mycology class when I was attending Texas State, and that opened my eyes to really just the mushroom industry in general. And it's kind of a new industry in the form of agriculture, where it's not as historically prevalent as some of the other production methods in agriculture. But that's where I got the first idea of, okay, there's a lot of demand for mushrooms right now. There's definitely not a lot of people producing them. And there's just a lot of interest in the public because of the relatively new feel of the industry. So I'd say that's how I got interested in it. And then you're right, it was in the middle of quarantine and COVID, and I didn't start producing then, but like the silver lining of all of that was that it was almost like a forced time of focus during quarantine, because I had a lot of time on my hands. I had just graduated graduate school, but we're in lockdown, and so nobody's really hiring. And so I decided to focus on writing a business plan, and I utilized that time to really dive into the details of what mushroom production might look like from a business standpoint.
That sounds pretty exciting to have all of that free time to be able to do that. I know that, mushrooms definitely are gaining popularity. I feel like every time I'm on my phone, I see an ad for a mushroom coffee or mushroom gummies, or, so many things that are advertising, different cognitive benefits. But I'm wondering, we know that they're not quite a normal plant. So what differentiates mushrooms in regards to agriculture from other crops that you might be growing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it was really eye-opening in that mycology class to learn that mushrooms are actually more closely related to animal than they are to plant. And humans and mushrooms also share some strands of DNA. And so it's really interesting when you start thinking about mushroom production. As a farmer, I wanted to come into it as treating it like a plant. And it is kind of like that in some essences, but it's also, I learned that the mushrooms are a lot more susceptible to oxygen levels, CO2 levels, and they typically tend to be grown indoors for production. And so you have to monitor all of these things independently, whereas growing a plant outdoors, nature kind of provides that free air exchange. And so it was a little bit of a learning curve, but really interesting to learn that mushrooms behave a lot more like an animal than they do a plant sometimes. And that was interesting.
So in regards to where you're at now, I'm curious, I know a lot of producers do shipping container or they have different, setups. What does your setup look like in regards to your grow room? And also, what are you growing?
Yeah. So when we first started production, we were leasing land in Lockhart, Texas. And so our best method of creating a good environment and infrastructure was to start in a shipping container. So we started in a shipping container. We separated it out into 3 different rooms, a lab, an incubation room, and then a fruiting room. And so the fruiting room was, I think it was 15 by 8. The incubation room was about 12 by 8. And then the lab was the remainder of the 40-foot container. And we did everything in that one container. And then whenever we had the opportunity to move farms and reduce our overhead costs, we reduced our lease price. And we also, at the new location where I'm at currently in Converse, Texas, which is just right outside of San Antonio, it had some infrastructure that we knew we were going to be able to utilize to scale up. And those were a couple of barns that are on the property, and these have concrete floors. So I have a 40 by 50 metal barn with a concrete floor. And so we expanded into that. But instead of expanding with more mushroom containers, we expanded with grow tents. And the reason for that was I could pack these grow tents inside of the barn that already has an infrastructure of a building, and it offers a little bit of climate control, but then I can fit more tents in the barn than I could and be able to grow more than I could if I bought 2 shipping containers. And so really, I was just balancing cost of production at that point into what was a better way to scale up. And so now I utilize the barn for my lab, incubation, and I have a fruiting tent in there. And I also have a separate fruiting room because I had another small barn that was on the new farm that we're at that I insulated and converted into another fruiting room. So now I have 2 fruiting chambers, an incubation tent, and a lab. And so I was able to scale up, and it didn't cost me as much as if I was going to scale up with only shipping containers. And to answer your second question, Gabriella, on what I'm currently producing, I've found that what works best for me is oyster mushrooms, lion's mane, and chestnuts. Occasionally in the fall, when it's not so hot, I like to do some king trumpets, but my main 3 are the oyster, lion's mane, and chestnut.
That sounds delicious. I love oyster mushrooms, doing like chicken fried oyster mushrooms or with the lion's mane because they have kind of that shrimpy taste. I do a really tasty coconut shrimp, but with lion's mane, and it's really tasty. But to get back to it, I know that, within agriculture, normal plants, for example, if you're doing a market garden, you might have a seed starting place, and then you would transplant them normally into a high tunnel or just, the normal ground. And you're mentioning here that you have a lab. And so I know with mushroom production, there's a lot of different ways to start that. So are you buying spawn? And there might be some terms that we might need to clarify for the audience. So what are you doing with that lab?
Yeah, good question, Gabriella. So the lab is where we are essentially mixing the mushroom genetics with the substrate that we're growing onto. And so we utilize 2 different methods, really. We have some that we keep in liquid culture, which is the mushroom genetics suspended in fluid form, in liquid. and you utilize a syringe to inject it into the grow bags. That's another point. We utilize grow bags, and I'll get to that here in a minute. And then we also have another method that we utilize because we get some of our grain spawn from a local company here in Texas because they have a really strong oyster genetic that just really produces well for us. And it's cost effective, and we produce a lot of oysters. So it helps to buy in the grain spawn that's already been inoculated. And we'll clarify some terms here. So whenever we mention that we're buying in grain spawn, what that looks like is that's already generally what we get is millet. And so it's millet grain that's been inoculated with a liquid culture of oyster mushroom. So then the liquid culture then inoculates and incubates and takes over that whole grain spawn bag. So we buy 25-pound bags. And so it looks like a white block of mushrooms that's probably 24 inches long and 12 inches wide and probably 5 inches thick in a vacuum sealed bag with a breathable patch. That's how grain spawn comes. And now with the lion's mane and the chestnuts, we make our own grain spawn. So we buy in the millet, we sterilize it, we pack it into these grow bags that have a breathable pouch. We inoculate the millet with our liquid culture, and then the mushroom mycelium takes over that millet, just as it does in the previous method that we talked about when we buy in grain spawn. We're essentially replicating that and doing it ourselves so that we don't have to buy grain spawn for lion's mane and chestnut because those are relatively expensive. And so to keep our costs of production down, we keep our own liquid culture and make our own grain spawn.
So I think it's important to mention that the mushrooms that we eat are primary saprobes. And so they eat the lignin in woods and primarily hardwoods. And so when it comes to making these bags, what is your substrate or the medium in which you're putting the grain spawn into? What are you using?
Yeah, so the substrate that we utilize is, like you were saying, a hardwood pellet. And we buy that in by the pallet. It's more cost effective to buy it in bulk than it is to buy it bag by bag. And so it looks like we're like a barbecue company or something when we're buying this amount of hardwood pellets. So it comes in pellet form, just like you load into the pellet smoker barbecue pits. We rehydrate the pellets essentially, but it makes it really easy to mix into the bags in pellet form. So we utilize the hardwood pellets, and then we utilize, depending on which one we can get, is soybean pellet or cottonseed hull. We utilize those in our substrate mix as well, and then mixed with water. So it always has hardwood. Most of the time it's organic soybean hull, and that's also pelletized for us. And then occasionally when you can't find organic soybean, we'll utilize organic cottonseed hull. So that's what is in our substrate mix for all of the genetics and different mushrooms that we grow.
And I know that a lot of other people also use the soybean hulls, and then maybe sometimes they use like different brands as well. And is that just to increase the nitrogen, or what exactly is that for in the substrate bag?
It's essentially it adds air, it adds porosity, but it also adds a structure for the mushroom mycelium to grow on. So you're increasing surface area, but also there's nutrient in the cottonseed hull and the soybean pellets that the mycelium utilizes to inoculate the whole bag. And so the use of the hardwood, soybean hull, and cottonseed hull provides all of the nutrients and environment that the mushroom mycelium needs to completely inoculate.
So a lot of different regions if you are growing indoors, you can have a different selection. Like you were mentioning in Texas, it is so hot there that it wouldn't really be efficient to grow king trumpets because I know they do need a little cold shock. If you're growing indoors, you do have a lot of flexibility with what species of mushroom that you're growing. But a lot of people don't really have that set up. Maybe they grow 1 or 2 bags in their home at a time. But I know that you are able also to grow some mushrooms outdoors, whether that's shiitake on logs or there are wine caps that you can inoculate into your garden mulch. Can you speak a little bit about some of these different ways that people at home could try to grow some of the mushrooms themselves?
Yeah, I have always looked at it from a business standpoint, not from a hobby standpoint. So I'm not real in tune with all of the low tech methods of production that folks utilize at home. However, I see people have success when they buy the already inoculated bags from a mushroom producer, be it North Spore, or there is a larger mushroom company here in Austin called Hi-Fi Mycology, and they sell their inoculated grow bags to consumers at the farmers market and then instruct them how to take it home and cut the bag open and spray it with water to get the mushroom to fruit. So I've seen people have success that way. I've also seen some success with farmers using liquid culture and inoculating their mulch walkways in their gardens, but it's just so inconsistent because the water is inconsistent or the air temperature or the humidity. And so I've never pursued methods of that like that because I need it to be consistent for cash flow and business purposes. And because I pursued mushroom production as a risk mitigation method, because I can control the climate of growing mushrooms, I can provide a consistent cash flow for the business to cover expenditures all times of the year, where in January and February, I might slow down because it's gotten really cold or we're in a freeze period during January, February. I know it doesn't freeze a lot in Texas, but sometimes it does. So January, February tends to slow down. And then in the really, really hot months like August and September, vegetable production tends to slow down again. And so the climate control of the mushroom production really helps cover all the expenditures that the business incurs when vegetable production is down. So that's kind of how I've always looked at it, not so much as a hobby. However, I've had some folks also grow in their house and they utilize their garage and they bought themselves a small grow tent so that they could control the climate inside the garage. And then they grew in tubs because that's a nice way for folks at home or hobby growers to, for one, decrease the cost of production because you can reuse the tubs, you can wash them, you can clean them, and you can also stack them so that you can fit more in that grow tent as a hobby and experiment with multiple different genetics at once. So I've seen that be successful as well, but my focus has always been for business production. I hope that answers your question, Gabriella.
Yeah, totally. And I think that actually made a really good point in regards to when you begin this journey of producing mushrooms and experimenting, what are you doing it for? Because many people start on a smaller scale. Most of the mushroom farmers that I know for a long time still had a proper 9 to 5, and then they were producing their mushrooms on the side. And as that business grew, they were able to pull back from their 9 to 5 and focus predominantly on their mushroom business. But it's also a great way, as you said, for, diversification. If you are already producing crops as a farmer, it's a great way to diversify what you're able to offer at the farmer's market or to restaurants. And also, the risk mitigation, if you have a normal 9 to 5, it's something that you can control as long as you have some markets. So speaking then of markets, I would love to know, where are you selling and how did you go about getting into those markets?
Yeah, so we sell through a couple different avenues. We sell at 2 farmers markets on the weekends. So we sell direct to consumer and get our highest price that way. And then we sell to the Central Texas Farmers Co-op. And they usually have between 150 to 200 members. So it's a lower price, but it's a larger quantity. And so I'm able to move 150 to 200 units at once at a lower price. But usually that's on a Monday or a Tuesday. So that's a great way to start the week after you've already accomplished your markets that weekend. And then there's a couple restaurants in town that also utilize them on their menu. And I'll usually give them a price cut as well if they order a 10-pound minimum of each variety. So those are my main methods of selling. And then, of course, I'll sell on the farm here to the neighbors in my community that know that I grow mushrooms. But I would say that's probably the smallest percentage right now. I'd say most of our sales, most of our revenue and income will come from market sales. The most quantity at a time we move is through the co-op. And then the restaurants are likely the most inconsistent, but sometimes we have really good weeks and other weeks not so much. So they're probably the lowest percentage of our income next to on-farm direct sales.
Are you doing anything with value added if you had a surplus, or, there's tinctures, coffee, people are adding it to granola, so many different things, whether that's from just edible standpoint, or if that's more of like the medicinal, homeopathic, holistic approach. But are you doing any value added with any of your mushrooms?
Yeah, we do some value added. Occasionally we have some leftover product. We really do tend to sell out every week, but we will utilize what we don't have or what we didn't sell over the weekend. And we'll make tinctures. In particular, a lion's mane tincture. It's really popular. People are catching on to it, and we can make a lot of units out of it. Stretches really far, I guess is a good way to put it, in tincture form versus dehydrated form. We'll utilize, and the lion's mane in particular, because it's popular or, it's trendy right now. And so folks will buy a $25 tincture relatively without complaining about the price at all, because the lion's mane supplements and value-added goods are going for quite a high price on the internet. And so even at $20 to $25 per tincture, I'm still cheaper than some products that are sold online. And you can get it right from the source of where the mushrooms are grown. So we do value added that way in tincture form, and it's shelf stable. So I can make a batch and I can store it for a long period of time because it's suspended in alcohol. There is a couple local apothecaries that like our dehydrated mushrooms, and they'll make their own health supplements. And so usually if I have leftover oyster or I have leftover chestnut, it typically doesn't look super awesome after its market days. Mm-hmm. And so I sell it to the apothecary at a discounted rate. They dehydrate it and they'll utilize it in their own health supplements there.
Nice. That's pretty cool. And I'm wondering, I feel like with many farmers, we can grow food really well, but when it comes to the marketing aspect, that's just where it becomes really challenging, because maybe we're more used to being on the farm and not being as social in public. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But I'm wondering, were you well known in your area, or how did you get in touch with these restaurants and the different apothecaries and health food stores? Did you just walk in, or what does that look like, and what can people glean from your experience on how to start producing mushrooms, but also getting their mushrooms into some shops or stores and making money?
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up, because the folks may not like my answer here, but it is, I found it to be quite true. It really was the farmers markets that opened all of the doors and opportunities for us. It's hard work. It's every Saturday. It's every week of the year, but it's a really effective method of advertising, of marketing. And believe it or not, folks that own these restaurants or these apothecary stores, they go to the farmers markets to find the local producers. And so me being at the farmers market, selling direct to consumer every weekend was also a way to showcase to the restaurants, to the chefs that were coming, to the apothecary store owners that came. They see that, okay, they have consistent supply. They're here every week. Their product looks good every week. I'm going to go talk to those folks. And so you make connections that way. And then also I've had success in online Instagram outreach, believe it or not, has been the most powerful social media tool that we have. Instagram has been surprisingly very effective. You can post quite easily. People follow you. And then I've gotten so many messages on Instagram of like, hey, I have a small apothecary store here. I'm interested in your products. What can you do? And it seems to happen more on Instagram than it does on via email. Like if I send out an email ad, for lack of a better term, to the local restaurants in the area, it doesn't get as much traction as that social media post does. And I think it might be the lack of imagery. Folks can't see what you have in an email as much as they can in a social media post, where the product's usually highlighted in imagery and it's more tangible, I think, is why that's been so successful. But yeah, I don't think we would have been successful if we had tried to do it without the farmers market. Now, our end goal is not to just be at the farmers markets forever, but it's opened a lot of opportunities, and it's been a great way to start.
That makes a lot of sense. It was a good jumping off point, and it helped build your audience and all these connections. It's not something you have to do forever, but it is a really good way to build these relationships. And then in regards to the Instagram and social media in general, I think that that's something that's really underutilized in the agriculture space, whether that's, market gardening, livestock, or mushrooms, because mushrooms are very photogenic. They're beautiful. They're strange. They're just very captivating. And I think that that's a really great tool to use for Instagram and making these different reels and just capturing people's attention. And then people reach out. That's a really fantastic use for that. So I hope that that's something that some of the producers that are listening to this podcast can glean from it, is trying to ramp up your social media. And there's lots of different ways, for making logos, or making your branding really aesthetic, because I am a sucker for a beautiful label. And so, really thinking about branding and marketing is something that is just, you have to view your farm or your production as a business. Otherwise, it's going to be really challenging. So thank you for sharing that. So some troubleshooting things. There's a couple things I know that we didn't cover in regards to the production, which would be, pasteurization and sterilization of your substrates, and incubation times, and harvesting temperatures and dates and things like that. And we have written a publication that covers all of these different topics with, the relevant ranges for temperatures and dates. And I think that that's something that you could check out if you're really interested, because it might not be the most engaging to just rattle off a bunch of different, temperature ranges for different species. But I'm wondering, Cody, what are some challenges that you faced when doing this, whether that was different diseases that you encountered or supplies? What are some things that you had faced that you had to overcome?
Yeah, top two issues that I would pay the most attention to when building your infrastructure is your free air exchange and how you control contamination. Those have been our largest challenges. And so the free air exchange is really important. You need to be bringing in fresh oxygen and getting rid of the mushroom CO2. This free air exchange increases your production and by magnitudes. If you have too much CO2 in the room, you're going to see some deformed looking mushrooms. And in fact, like an oyster, for example, they'll say it looks like an eagle claw or an eagle talon, like the fruiting body comes out looking deformed. And that's when you know that you have some free air exchange issues going on. The other thing that'll really slow down your production and really tick you off and make you do a lot of work is a contamination. If you get a contamination in your fruiting room and you don't take care of it in a timely manner, or you have mushrooms that you didn't harvest on time and they spore dropped in the fruiting room, these cause production issues that take away from your income and also take away from your available time to do other tasks. And so the best way to prevent contamination that we found is, and whenever we are sterilizing our bags, we don't use pressure because we built our own steam decontamination barrel. We utilize steam and time rather than pressure because it's safer. I don't want my sterilization barrel to blow up because I am just a farm boy that built it. And so I mitigate risk because I know that by using steam and time, I'm not building pressure, and it's a lot safer for my use at my house at the farm. So we utilize a steam barrel with the false bottom and a float with water and a heating element. And we've got it in a 55-gallon drum. We can fill between, depending on the size of the bags, 20 to 30 bags in the barrel, put the lid on it, and steam it for 24 hours. That's really helped us decrease contamination. And then whenever we're going into the lab, it's important to wear your masks, wear your gloves, have your isopropyl alcohol on hand, and spray everything down, spray your gloves. Don't touch your cell phone. I mean, you really need to be conscious in the lab of using aseptic techniques like we used in biology lab. And to the extent that you are consistent with that and even sometimes really anal about it, especially when you have employees or help that day, it may seem like you're like over focusing on the sterilization, but it really is that important, because if it's 3 weeks down the road or 2 weeks down the road and you see the contamination in the incubation chamber, or you see it come up in the fruiting room, well, that's time and money lost that could have been prevented if you were just a little bit more conscious in your lab. So I would say aseptic technique, free air exchange in your fruiting chamber are the top two things that will keep production flowing and keep it at a successful rate. We utilize sensors in our fruiting room to monitor humidity, temperature, and CO2. And so these sensors are connected to the AC, so it knows when to turn on to decrease temperature. It's also connected to our humidity. We have, I forget their names, but they essentially create humidity in a tub, and we have it connected to the sensor. When humidity gets low, it blows water vapor into the fruiting chamber. And then the CO2 sensor's connected to the air exhaust fan, so that whenever CO2 levels get high, the excavation fan turns on and blows the CO2 out of the container. So I hope that helps. That's really kind of a explanation of how we sterilize and how we produce.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, especially at the scale you're at. It seems like that initial investment in regards to all of the different sensors and climate control saves so much time and money later through preventing contamination and really optimizing the proper airflow and humidity. I made a bag willy-nilly a couple weeks ago, and I had the worst trichoderma outbreak in my bag, and I just had to scrap it. But it was definitely a bummer because I wasted a lot of resources and my own time doing it. But on the positive end, I could just chuck it in my garden and use it as compost. So, nothing's really lost. What do you do with all of your spent blocks?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we go through a lot of them a week, probably close to 40, 50 spent bags a week. We utilize unicorn grow bags, the biodegradable, and we partner with another farm and ranch friends of mine. They take our bulk spent mushroom bags, and then they incorporate it into their on-farm composting program. And then, 6 to 7 months down the road, I'll get compost back in return. I could do it myself on the farm, but I don't like using the spent mushroom directly into my growing rows because it's a lot of carbon and it tends to tie up my nitrogen nutrient cycling in the row. So if I do incorporate it into my garden or into my grow plots directly, I'll put it in the walkways first, and then after that season that I've walked down the walkways and it's kind of biodegraded by nature, then I'll toss it into the grow rows. But most of our bags all go to Behind the Oaks Ranch down the road here, and they compost it for me.
Nice. I love that you're using biodegradable unicorn bags. That's something I have always felt really strongly about. It's, eating mushrooms. It's often this endeavor, because we're driven by health and, as well as, there's usually a love for the environment if you care about your health or even producing the mushrooms. And then, paradoxically, to have this huge amount of plastic waste just was always rubbing me wrong. So I love that you're using the biodegradable bags. And then that's a really important point as well about composting the spent blocks prior to using them in your garden to prevent that carbon tie-up or the nitrogen tie-up. So thank you for sharing that. And that's another good tip to producers as well, is connecting with your local mushroom farm to see if you can get some of these spent blocks to eventually increase your soil fertility is a really good idea. Before we wrap up though, I wanted to let you plug your farm, and if you have any last words or tips, tricks, advice, words of wisdom for people that want to begin their mushroom growing journey.
Yeah. So I operate under the Small Farmers Academy in San Antonio, Texas. We are a production farm. We produce 6 to 8 different varieties of vegetables a season. We grow mushrooms year round, and we have a soil health crew of livestock. I don't do animal husbandry or really sell meat protein, but I utilize livestock as my soil health crew, and they keep my nutrient management and weed pressure back in my grow plots. And also I need that animal integration on the farm. I would say if you're looking into getting mushrooms and getting going with production, look at it from a business standpoint. Make sure that you're covering your bases and do spend the time demanded in the beginning in designing your infrastructure, making sure that your fruiting room has got what it needs. You need to be able to control humidity, temperature, light, and air. So make the investments up front. It will save you a lot of time and money later. And I'm speaking from experience because when we started, we did a lot of things the wrong way first. And so self-taught efficiency. So I would say start there. And yeah, even though you don't want to, investing time into social media, making some simple posts here and there. Like, I am by no means an influencer. And if my farm boy self can do it and make it work on social media, you can do it too. And to the point that I invest more time and maybe later down the road get somebody to manage my social media, it will even open more doors. So use it as the tool it is. It's helped a lot. And then though it takes time and effort and it's every Saturday and you might work 6 days a week, being there at that farmer's market is going to be worth it for you. Even if you plan to not do it for the whole entirety of your operation, I would say give it at least 6 months and see what opportunities come from it. And it also offers you a weekly avenue to get rid of mushrooms, and you need that cash flow. You need it for your business to be successful. And come into it with a sense of discovery. It ain't going to go perfect. You're going to have to trial and error some things, but it's time, not talent. And you'll get it right, and then it'll be successful. And mushroom production is it really is time efficient and time effective. Whenever you get your infrastructure down and you get your processes rolling, it's a lucrative industry. And I wish you the best. Good luck.
Thank you so much for sharing those different tips and tricks. I hope you guys were writing that down. And if you're really curious about digging a little bit deeper into mushroom production, we do have our mushroom production and marketing publication through ATRA. And we have several different videos and podcasts on our ATRA YouTube that you guys should check out. And I'll link all of that in the show notes. But thank you so much, Cody, for having this conversation with me. It was a lot of fun. And I hope that everybody was able to glean a lot of useful information from this.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Gabriella.
Of course. All right. Well, take care, everybody.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at atra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. ATRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.